Hey everybody, Cole here with Classic Mini DIY, and on today's episode I want to show you guys how to make your own custom ignition cables to make your engine really pop and to give you nice, reliable ignition behavior. So stay tuned for that. Hey everyone, as I said, on today's episode, I am going to be showing you guys how to make your own custom ignition cables to really make your car have that custom, nice, classic look while using modern, reliable ignition wire and not breaking the bank while you do it. Now, a lot of people think that the ignition wires on your car are some sort of special, really hard to make or really hard to produce wires, when in reality it is essentially just a heavily insulated wire that can handle a high level of current and a high level of amperage. So you guys may have seen kits on the market for ignition cables, and they vary in price depending on the ones that you get. But on today's episode, I'm going to be using a selection of parts from a company called Tons Performance. This is a performance shop located here in the US, and they sell a variety of different ignition cables, which you guys should be seeing a nice different collection of the colors available. They have different sizes, thicknesses, and all sorts of different designs. Now, for this beautiful 1100 engine that we're building, I want to make a set of custom wires so that they run the exact lengths that they need to. I don't have a whole bunch of excess up here. The ignition coil is in a slightly non-standard place, so I'd like for everything to just look really nice. So today I wanted to show you guys how I do this. But in order to do that, first we need to jump over to the bench, and I'm going to show you the parts that I have for this setup. Now, if this is something that you want to do on your car, you only need a few things, and they're not very expensive tools in order to accomplish this. So what we're looking at here is all of the rubber boots that we're going to be using on this kit. For my setup, I am going to be using 90-degree boots. They do sell straight boots if that's the look that you're going for, so you do have some options. These two right here are for your ignition coil to the distributor center. These four right here for your spark plugs. These four are for the spark plug wires going back to the distributor. This is our little MSD vice grip tool. I'm going to show you guys more about how that works in a little bit. Our two metal 90-degree clips for the ignition coil centers. And then of course our connectors for our spark plug leads. And then finally another 4 connectors to connect your spark plug wires back to the distributor. So all in all, this kit will cost you about $20 to $30, depending on what you buy, where you buy it. But really happy with Tons Performance. They have such a wide array of different cable here. And now this is the only other part that you'll need, which is of course the cable itself. What I am using, and what I've used on all of my mini builds since I started making these wires myself, is this 8mm suppression core. I like this because it is a modern cable inside, but on the outside it's a nice classic look. They offer this in yellows, blacks, greens, blues, all sorts of different color combinations, so go check it out, see which one you like the most. And then I have this little retainer for organizing the cables. I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to use this, but we're going to give it a shot depending on how we have everything set up. So let's get onto the bench vise, and I'm going to show you guys how this MSD tool works. It's actually pretty cool. Now to start off, let's go ahead and set our crimping tool in here. And you'll notice there are 2 different sides you can set this up on. I'm going to set that in just like this. Go ahead and clamp that down. We just want it tight enough to where it's not going to move around. And then we're going to grab our actual cable. Now you see this little loop right here, and let's zoom this in so you get a better look. Now you can see this goes in just like this, and you're going to want to just stop it. Basically, put it up to the bump there and stop it. And this is why this tool is so cool. Essentially, you take a little box cutter and you cut down in there and just rotate this cable around. And you're essentially cutting just the outer cover off without slicing the inner suppression core. So we're going to take that back out, give it a little twisty twist and a pull. And now we have our suppression core exposed, and this is the perfect length for a crimp. So we've got that done. Next, we're going to take one of our crimping ends and we're going to go ahead and insert this into the tool. Now what we're going to start with is the ignition coil center connection. That's this connection that goes from your ignition coil to your distributor. And the way I like to do this, and what's really important, one thing I didn't call out at the beginning is that you will need some dielectric grease. This is best practice. This is going to help keep things nice and conductive between all of the surfaces, but it's also going to help you kind of install and set all this up. I'm taking the rubber boot, which you can see is the 90-degree rubber boot. So I'm going to go ahead and press that in, get it started, and I just want to press this all the way through. Now the idea is that we're going to crimp on our metal connector, which is this little connector here, now, so that when it's all connected up, this will be ready and you can slide that boot back over. Now what's going to happen, this little tool, it's actually pretty ingenious. Essentially, you have your end that needs to be crimped. There's some metal contacts in here, and essentially this sandwiches it down, flips it over, and crimps it down onto that wire as you are twisting this vise and clamping these two pieces together. What I normally do, and this is my own personal preference, is I like to fold this wire right here back over, and I'm going to add a little bit of grease here, and this is going to essentially go over, and you want the wire, if you're going to fold it over in that way, resting on the metal. You essentially want that to be as in contact and in part of the crimp as it possibly can be. So you can see wire bent back, connection goes over just like that. Now, if you want to, you can also cut this a little bit longer if you so choose. Now, if you want to, if you like having a little bit more meat to play with, no pun intended, you can also cut this sheathing off a little bit more. Now, one thing I also like to do with my setups is to go ahead and pinch these two connectors together a little bit. Sometimes you might find you'll have to do this in order to kind of like pre-start the crimp. And this is just going to help as you start to smush this down in the vise to kind of guide it in place. As you can see, I'm kind of pre-bending the ears down a little bit as well. It's just going to make the crimp a little bit nicer. Now you'll note that I'm putting the open face down onto the metal portion of this. So it was at that moment that my microphone died, but what we're going to be doing now is going ahead to crimp this connector down, and you do that by tightening the vise. You can see those crimps bending over and clamping down onto that wire, making that nice tight crimp. The wire is, of course, on the back side connecting to the metal face, and I'm just going to hold this up for you guys so you can see it, but this is what the crimp should look like when you finish using this tool. It's pretty straightforward, but you can see that wire kind of bent backwards and a nice tight crimp there. After that, all that's left is sliding that boot back over, and now you have a freshly crimped end on one side of your wire. And the next step is measuring out that wire and cutting and crimping the other end. So measuring the wire is the part that I think most people would get wrong, or is where you're going to run into the most issues, I think. So what I like to do is connect one end to whatever end I'm working on, whether it's the spark plug or the ignition coil, and then I like to kind of run this down and hold the wire roughly in place. Once I have it at a good length, then I am going to extend it just a little bit so that the wire is just a little bit longer. And that's going to give me a little bit of room to kind of cut and play with this a little bit. But you also will want to hold this in the orientation and the position that you envision this running in the car. So if you want it to have kind of a loop in it, or you want it to kind of bend up in a nice like rainbow arc, you're going to want to make sure that you are testing that out now, and then you can bring it back over and repeat the exact same steps, crimping that other end to your ignition coil wire in this case, and we'll connect that up and it'll look really great. All right, and so there we have it, our first connection done and made. So with that first connection made, all that's left is to go from each spark plug, run spark plug 1 to the number 1 location on the distributor, spark plug 2 to number 2, rinse, repeat, and you're going to just go one by one and crimp both ends. It's a pretty therapeutic process. It can take a little while, but this is where you get to use your creativity and kind of determine exactly how you like those wires to run and how you'd like it to look on your car. All right, so the next important thing to do when you're making ignition leads, this is really a best practice. I will be honest with you guys, I don't do this on kits that I make for myself. I just run them and see if it works. But when you're making a set, I figured it's probably a good idea to go ahead and call this out to you guys. You're gonna want to make sure that you measure the resistance on these wires that you create. Resistance is the amount of energy that it takes for electricity to travel from one end to the other. So the longer the line is, the higher the resistance usually is. Now, for every foot, you're getting about, about a kilo ohm. Now, depending on the wire that you get or the ignition, lead that you are getting, the resistance per foot is going to change. But the key is that you want to make sure that the resistance that you are seeing on this line matches the spec of the wire that you purchase. Also, wires that have a ton of resistance are likely going to not fire and not run your car very well, at least in the Classic Minis situation. So keep that in mind when you're running and picking out these wires. If you're getting this 8mm suppression core that I purchased from Tons Performance, their spec is 500 ohms per foot of resistance, which is not very much resistance at all. That's actually quite good. The stock lines, the stock ignition wires that you probably would buy off the shelf for most minis are usually around 4,000 ohms of resistance. So with these, you're getting a whole boatload of power traveling from one end to the other. And to even generate the same amount of resistance for these 8mm suppression core lines, you'd need basically 8 feet of line in order to accomplish that. So that's pretty cool. Now, to measure resistance, it's pretty straightforward. So you see our multimeter here, and it has a few different settings. This little symbol right here is the ohm symbol. You don't have to be an electrical engineer to do this. It's not very difficult. This is a very valuable gauge to have. It does all sorts of wonderful things. I have a link to the one that I'm using here in my description. It's nothing super fancy, but it works really, really well. Now, what we're going to be choosing, you can see here, this is the range of measurement that we're doing. So if you wanted to measure under 200 ohms, you'd set it to 200. If you want to measure more than that, in our case, 2 kilo ohms, which is 2,000 ohms, then move it up the scale, up the scale, up the scale, depending on what you're measuring. In our situation, our lines are all about a foot long, plus or minus maybe half a foot, and we're going to make sure that these are under what should be about 500 to 1,000 ohms. So the way we do that first is to verify our gauge is working, and you can do that by taking these two leads, touching them together, and this is essentially a perfect circuit. So you can see it's got virtually no resistance whatsoever. Now, for something like a human being, we're going to ramp this up. You can see connecting the circuit between my two fingers, we have just about half, let's see, that puts us at just under 500,000 ohms. So human being has 500,000 ohms of resistance, or at least I do. So moving this back down on the scale, what we're going to do is touch one end to the connection in here, and you're going to want to make sure you're holding this pretty tight and getting that connection nice and strong. Make sure you're making good contact with the metal. preferably at the tip of this connector here. And then we're going to run this down into our connector. And there you have it, 0.465 kilo ohm, which means that is 465 ohms, which is a little less than the spec. So that's great. This is perfectly in spec. So what we want to do, if we're being thorough and doing this the right way, is taking each ignition lead, measuring the resistance, and making sure that it is within the range of the spec of the wire. If you have any questions about this, let me know. Hopefully it didn't make it too confusing, but it's just the whole intention of this is to make sure that all of your lines are within spec and are going to deliver that spark quickly, efficiently, and without any issue. So I happened to luck out and I found some footage of me crimping on the connectors for my EFI project. And you can see this connection to my coil pack is a little bit different than what you were seeing on the videos before. But I wanted to show you this because it's a great example of the fact that this wire, and as long as you have the crimps that are necessary, you don't need to buy some super expensive connecting wires for your spark plugs or for your coil pack. You can literally just make these yourself, regardless of the connector, as long as you can find that connector to crimp onto your suppression core wire. So adding a little bit of this footage from the past, this is when I was initially building out my turbo build, but you can see I'm running an extremely long ignition wire, and that's from the ignition on the bulkhead, down along the inner wing, up to the spark plugs. And this likely wouldn't have been something that was possible if I didn't have this 8mm suppression core that's ultra low resistance. So I can run these really long wires that have less resistance than the shorter factory wires that were originally on the Mini. And the benefit of this is that I also know that I have a long, perfectly made custom cable with no cuts, no issues, nothing like that. Something worth mentioning though is that when you are running these really low resistance wires, the spark is more intense, and so you can, without any issue, run resistance spark plugs that are used in mostly what's available now without any issues and without any detriment to your ignition system. All right, so that is a little look at how to make ignition cables for a classic Mini. Now we're wrapping up, of course, in front of a different car. I have sent the 1100 car back off to its owner. If you didn't see that video, I have it posting up in the corner of this video. That was a really, really special handoff. He is loving that car. I get pictures from him every week. It's been very exciting to see that on the road again. But if you have any questions about making your own ignition wires, feel free to post those in the comment section below. I tried to cover all of the high-level items as well as some of the nitty-gritty, but this is a pretty straightforward job, and you can make some really special creations or really some special engine bay looks with just a little pop of color on those ignition cables and make it look really classic. So anyways, thank you everybody for joining me on today's episode, and until I see you on the next one, which we got a lot to talk about this car coming up very soon. You guys know the drill. Enjoy those minis and motor on. See you guys.